You know emerging markets better than anyone, and I'm sure you also know that for years, decades really, investors have really been interested in the promise of India. There is a focus right now, if you will, on that country, on its economy and on its capital markets that seems much different than what that focus had been in the past. What's changed?
Well, I think that this focus you're seeing on the back of Prime Minister Modi's visit here has a lot to do with geography and size. The fact that there is such disenchantment with China, and India is the only country of that kind of size, and now also its economic size has become and made it so relevant.
Are there lessons, though, that Modi can take from Xi Jinping and his move to globalize the Chinese economy and avoid some of maybe the missteps that Xi Jinping made?
Yeah, I think it's quite clear, which is that as far as China is concerned, that if you look at China's development path, it was a fantastic development path. It's only in the last few years that it's got derailed, and it's got derailed because they took on too much debt. It's got derailed because the state there has decided to become much more interventionist, flex its muscle, and because China has in a way also been retreating from the world and turning more inward. So what Modi needs to sort of realize today is that India is where China should be, or where China was about 20 years ago or so. It should still be a country that's opening up. It should still be a country that is backing its private sector, and not a country where the state is coming down too heavily on the private sector and curbing the animal spirits of the economy. So I think that's the key distinction between India and China just now, but a lesson that Modi needs to take. And the other big lesson, I'll say, is one of complacency, right? That when you're being feted this way, the entire world is talking this way about you. There is a tendency of many countries in the world, and even India in the past, of taking it easy or just sort of basking in the glory. And when anyone has anything critical to say, the government shuts it down, thinking that these guys are here to just spoil the party. So I think that they need to be very careful of that. Their expectations out of India are also very high. We
were speaking a little bit earlier this week about the unemployment rate in China, specifically among the youth, something over 21%. India isn't that far behind. I think, depending on what numbers you use, somewhere around 17, 18% here. So that's something that has to be addressed. But it's also those same demographics that I think attracts a lot of investors. The idea that they have a younger population relative to China, younger working age population, I should say, relative to China.
Yeah, so the potential is huge, right? That this has always been there. But something which, a line that I've always repeated about India is that this is a country that has consistently disappointed the optimists and the pessimists. So the last few years, it has clearly disappointed the pessimists because it's done much better than what the worst forecasts were. Now, I think that we just have to be careful that India doesn't follow its past pattern and disappoint the optimists as well. So I think that this is about expectations, about controlling that, about letting the numbers come through. Because if you look at India today, the amount of foreign investment that India attracts is still quite small as a share of its economy. Look at numbers, such as foreign direct investment. The amount that comes into India is like around 1% of GDP. Now, when China was booming and really sort of growing at a 9-10% clip, it was attracting foreign investment, or foreign direct investment in particular, of close to 4% of GDP. Even today, other emerging markets are attracting foreign investment of around 2-2.5% of GDP. So we need those numbers now to come through after this incredible amount of expectations and also outperformance that we have seen.
In order to do that, do they need to sort of, I guess, broaden what's available to invest in? One criticism that I've heard from foreign investors is that the Indian economy, at least in terms of what can be invested in, and they're primarily talking about public markets, is way narrower than what you're going to find in China and even other emerging markets. You even see that in a market capitalization. $3 trillion stock market compared to mainland China's stock market, which is like 12 or 13 trillion.
Yeah, but I think the stock market in India has done very well because, the Indian economy, remember, is also about 3 trillion. So, but if you look
at is that where the growth is, the list, meaning the publicly listed companies?
Yes.
The criticism is that a lot of the companies and industries they want to invest in aren't public yet. So they either feel like they have to find a direct way into those companies or they have to sit on the sidelines until there's a listing.
Well, for foreign investors and their track record of doing private investments in India is quite mixed. So I think that the public markets in India have done very well. if you look at the breadth of companies in India and the diversity of the stock market, that's one of the best I know of any country in the world. There are so many sectors represented out there, from manufacturing to healthcare to commodities. It's all there. Technology, like, obviously is known. If you look at other emerging markets, they tend to be very concentrated. You know, Brazil has one or two sectors which make up the market, or even China got so sort of taken up by tech as far as the good performing markets concerned. So I don't think that's an issue as far as India is concerned. What's an issue today is just the fact that the valuations are very high, which is reflective of the fact that expectations are very high out of India, and those need to come through now. We need to see the numbers come through, and you can never have an attitude that where else will the money go? It's got to come to India. Right. I think that like attitude can be problematic. So we are all sort of, I think that today you'd have to be a very big contrarian to take a bet against India, because the fundamentals do look pretty good as far as India is concerned. But also the fact that expectations and the hype around India is something which is quite unprecedented.
So a couple decades ago, I was going through some old news clips. There were all these headlines. India's on the cusp. The world needs a new economic powerhouse. These are all stories written about India,
yes,
10, 15, 20 years ago here. I'm curious, if we have a chance to sit down, God willing, in 10, 20 years from now, are we still going to be talking about India trying to become the next big thing, or will they already be that big thing then?
See, India's story has always been incremental in nature, because if you look at the projections which were done there, like in terms of that, India's grown steadily, right? But it's always grown at a rate, which is very linked to how the global economy does, how other emerging markets do. So India has grown steadily. It's been an incremental path. What we are now waiting to see is whether there'll be a linear shift in India's growth trajectory. But the issue with, as far as China is concerned and India is concerned, is that the ability of India to carry out massive big bang reforms is quite limited by its political economy. I don't know if because even if you look at Modi, that in terms of if it's come to really dismantling, a lot of the bureaucratic and socialist state, he's been quite tentative about that. So it's not what China did. China, in terms of in its peak boom years, had a massive overhaul of the public sector enterprises. They fired 80, 90 million people or something, in terms of just rationalizing the entire public sector. There's no chance in India you're going to get policies like those, because the political backlash will be huge. The DNA is much more socialist. So we have to be, I think, very mindful of the Indian political economy and what the expectations are of us. So I remain, in terms of on my travels to India, quite optimistic, and I remain optimistic because you have so many states in India that are competing with each other to attract more foreign investment. Here we tend to focus a lot more on Modi and what's happening in Delhi. But remember, in India is a very federal society, and you have a lot of states which are doing a lot to attract investment. That makes me quite optimistic about India.